Okay, Mr. McInnes. In 1927, you remember back, you worked part of the time, and part of the time you went to school. What did you do? How was that?
Our family moved back to the farm, I believe in 1927, after having lived in Urbana for 2 years while my brothers and sisters were going to college. And at that time, I farmed 160 acres of land, and at that time, Urbana schools were having a remodeling trouble time, and I went to school half a day in the mornings. I tried to get through in 3-year high school, but they would not allow that. I had to go back to get 1 year of English. Otherwise, I would have been through in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And both years, I took a complete full schedule of classes for that half day. As a result, I wound up, instead of 32 credits for high school, I had 36 credits. And the 160 acres of land, I got the work done.
Was that your father's land?
Yes. He helped occasionally, but mostly he was working somewhere else to make some money. One of the jobs that he did then was, I believe, was selling subscriptions to maybe Indiana Farmer's Guide at $3.15. 15 cents was for the sign. $3 was for the subscription to the paper for 5 years, I believe was 5 years, including Pinkerton Detective Service, protection of your farm. And nobody had any money, so he had a chicken coop on the side of his Ford, Model T Ford, and every place he went, he traded 3 old hens for the subscription.
That is so cute.
If they didn't have chickens, he would trade for 3 cans of fruit or whatever.
What did they used to call that? Border?
Barter.
Barter.
Yes.
They're doing that again now, you know?
Yes. It's a smart way of doing business if you can get together. They did make a special arrangement with the poultry dealer, and he got, as I recollect, 2 cents a pound for the chickens, more than normal price, because he brought so many in. And in general, they sold every farmer as they went. He was part of a crew, but those people sold every farm in the area. And one of the farmers was not going to buy or trade. He didn't need anything like that. He had 2 good watchdogs. And the history of that situation was that with his watchdogs, he had butchered and hung all his meat in the smokehouse, and the hams and shoulders and so on in the smokehouse, and he didn't need any protection from Pinkerton Detective Service. His dogs would do it. And a few days...
What do you mean the dogs would do it?
Take care of anybody that wanted to steal. They were the watchdogs.
Oh, what type of dogs were they?
I don't know. German Shepherds, I expect. They were vicious dogs. And anyway, within the week, while they were still in that area, he went out to get a ham for breakfast, and the dogs were hanging in the smokehouse, and the hams were all gone.
The thief. They ended up being the thief? That's darling.
I started, while we were on the farm, I started doing trapping. Muskrats, skunks, mink, coons, whatever, anything. But in our area, the muskrats were the big thing. And I would go set my traps in the ditch, and I covered a territory of possibly 2 or 3 miles along the streams, and I'd start out maybe at 4 o'clock in the morning, or on stormy nights, if it was raining and misty, I would go and run my trap line at night, early in the evening, while the muskrats were running and sliding down the slides into the water.
What slides?
They made their own slides for fun or into the water. At the bottom of these slides would be where I'd set the traps.
Of course, that'd be a good place to put them, wouldn't it?
So I would actually get maybe 2 nights of use of traps in one on those kind of nights, running those maybe at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then 4 in the morning, and would trap until about Christmas time, when the ditches would be froze up and little chance to catch very much after that. I made enough money trapping to invest then into the bee business, into the production of honey. And I bought hives and catch bees wherever I could, swarms of bees.
You actually go out and get them?
If some swarm light on a tree, why, I'd go and get it and put these in a hive, and they were mine then.
What would you have to get the queen bee?
I didn't bother about such minor trivialities.
How is that done to
You get
collect?
the whole swarm into the hive. Of course, if the queen went in, they all went in there too. But you could take a handful of bees and put them in that hive, and they'd all go in anyway.
You mean you reached in there with your hand?
Could, yes. Hand or stick or whatever. It wouldn't make any difference. I used special gloves that reached up to my elbows. I had a veil on with sort of a skirt on it that was elastic around the bottom that brought so that the bees couldn't get into my neck and eyes. I developed that from one hive, finally got up to as high as 160 colonies. This started back about 1927 or 8, I don't know what, but I had the bees until along about 1938 when we came to Monticello, producing honey. Honey wasn't worth very much, and sometimes we had a lot of honey. I would take honey to Chicago one time in the worst of the Depression. I took a couple of ton of honey to Chicago. It cost $20 for the truck to deliver it into Chicago, and the broker would not pay me anything other than the $20 until he got it sold.
Like on commission, you mean?
Yes, it was on a commission. And so, in due time, I got my money all right. But this was the way that was handled. Honey in those days was, well, maybe 6 or 7 cents a pound. Today it's considerably more. I don't remember how much it is now, but it's there was quite a difference. I peddled honey and vegetables. I was in from about 1932 maybe. I got into the market gardening business and had 17 acres of truck gardening.
Now that brings us to the day, you do remember the day of the Depression.
Yes, that Depression, the crash came in about 1929 when the market, that is the stock market, crashed. That really didn't upset our family too much because we were on the farm, we had plenty to eat. We didn't buy anything, so it didn't make much difference. We had canned goods that we canned, the gardening, and meat we had there, and honey, and milk. We had all of that on the farm. So we didn't really have to do very much buying. But in about 1931 or 2, we lost the farm, 245 acres, to Depression times.
Oh, God.
Not too different, maybe, than what it is today. It's a little different, but not too different. The morning that the banks closed, now this was at the time when Roosevelt had been elected and he closed all the banks in the country. And in order to make them sound. And that morning I had gone and taken all the money that our family had. It was $22 in cash. And I went and bought a barn to move on to this market garden plot. And at 8 o'clock, this was at 6 o'clock that I bought the barn in the morning. And at 8 o'clock, the bank did not open. And we were without money of any kind for about 2 weeks until the bank opened again. When it opened, we had money in the bank, some.
But it depreciated.
Yes.
You wouldn't remember how much you got per dollar.
I don't remember how this was at all. But I do remember something about that summer that Mother would either send somebody or I would go and get pork chops, for instance, or steaks. We would get 10 cents worth of meat for the 3 of us for a meal. 10 cents. And those 2 years of that worst of the time, my dad and I butchered hogs and peddled the meat. I peddled the meat. I would go and buy hogs at a 200-pound hog for $2.50. And we butchered those, and I delivered from Sydney into Champaign this meat all cut up, delivered this to door at approximately 8 cents a pound.
My goodness.
3 pounds for a quarter or something like that. And we sold the lean meat, sausages and so on, but we had the lard left during all this winter, couldn't sell it. And then towards spring, I was able to unload all the lard that we had made for the season to one fraternity house. They bought the whole thing.
For what use did
They would
use
use it for frying meat and so on.
Oh.
They used lard. We didn't have Crisco and things like that in those days.
At one time you started truck farming?
This truck farming was done, started that I think in 1932, about that time at least, with 17 acres of truck garden. I had cabbage, tomatoes, strawberries, corn, sweet corn. I had, I think, 8 acres of potatoes. I had, strange as it may seem, I had about an acre of potatoes and tobacco together. Had tobacco in this potato patch, and there was no tobacco anywhere around, but we had the finest crop of tobacco worms you ever heard of.
Worms?
Tobacco worms, nice big ones.
Well, wouldn't they eat the leaves?
Sure, and we had to go over the entire patch every day and pick these worms off.
Like potato bugs.
That was the way it was done.
Did you, by any chance,
they-
have a compost?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Here's one of the things about the potatoes
Mm-hmm.
and the hard times. When we dug the potatoes, we picked up even the smallest ones that were not even any bigger than marbles. And we had the poorer people bought those small potatoes. And I can remember one widow that had 4 or 5 kids. They bought, I think, 8 or 10 bushel of those little potatoes. They were 25 cents a bushel. And the bushel of good potatoes was only $1 of regular size. So there was, and we had melons, lots of melons. I don't remember how many acres of melons, but I do remember we had a shed out in the place so that when the melons began to get ripe, anybody that come there could have all the melons they wanted to eat. And then, of course, they could buy 1 or 2 and go on. And I stayed at night to watch that. And one of the things that I finally got to me was that I didn't like to have to guard that melon patch and shoot somebody, because it was a nightly affair. Somebody was in there stealing melons. And on one occasion I went to, when it was foggy as could be and you couldn't see any place, I went to an Epworth League meeting in Sydney. And the next morning when I went out to the melon patch, here was at least 200 melons that had been plugged and just turned over. Destroyed, in other words.
Just vandalism.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, more or less, I got out of the idea of trying to raise watermelons. That didn't work so well.
Now, did you have any people working for you at that time?
During the time I had this 17 acres of truck garden, I had, I think, 30 people working at $1 a day. And I had 2 trucks that I had made over from touring cars. One was a 1917 Dodge, 4-cylinder Dodge touring, and then I made a truck out of that. And then I had a Hudson Super 6 that I made a truck out of. And one of the interesting things about this, I always was in Champaign on the street delivering door-to-door peddling by 8 o'clock in the morning, and usually would wind up finished by 12 or maybe as late as 1 o'clock at the latest.
A.M. or P.M.?
A.M.
My
and
goodness.
1 o'clock, a truckload pedaled door to door.
Oh.
One morning we had 20 bushel of peas. We'd get the kids there to pick the peas, and I had 20 bushel of peas that morning, and I peddled those, as I recollect, 3 pounds for a quarter. Now, a pound was a strawberry box, a quart box, heaped up. That was a pound. I didn't weigh them. Here's 3 boxes for a quarter. And
I should have come and bought vegetables from you.
well, this was, we peddled whatever we had.
Something's interesting to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. How did you fertilize your ground?
The potatoes, for instance, we used potash. The fertilizers. Potash produces roots crops. Phosphorus produces bloom or seed. Nitrogen produces greens. And that is the way we used. And this fertilizer, even in later years, we used this same type of thing, but they came to number a way of fixing fertilizer or strength of fertilizer into 5, 10, 20 or whatever. But in the early days, you didn't have that. You had phosphorus, for instance, phosphates. And we, on the farm, back, I don't know, remember what year, but way back a lot, maybe 1920 or 21 or 2, we spread 2 carloads of phosphate on the wheat crop. And the wheat grew so tall, but it did produce a real good crop of wheat. It grew a little too tall for us. But that was the first of the fertilizers. And my dad was one of the first in the county to grow soybeans ever. The first crop we planted 6 acres, and the second year 17 acres. And all of that had to be cultivated with a hand hoe. We hoed the whole place like we were hoeing a garden in order to keep it clean. And as I recollect, the yield on that was about 17 bushels to the acre. Now that's nothing like it is today at 50 or so.
What was soybean used for at that time? And how did your father have the idea of planting soybeans?
I don't remember exactly what motivated the planting of soybeans. The first we got, I remember they talked about getting this stuff from China, the soybeans, and they were not all yellow as we have today. We had yellow soybeans, yeah, but they had speckled and black and other brown and every other color in there. And I think it was about the 3rd year before we started to sort these out so that we actually had yellow beans. And the way it was done, the first 2 years, all of it, all was sold was for seed, everything, at about, as I recollect, about $5 a bushel. And the way they sorted the beans, he sold 2,000 bushels to somebody in Ohio. And we run these through a fanning mill to get the seed even and get rid of the bad seed and weeds and so on. and the dirt and run everything down through a trough or a chute down through the barn so that these beans rolled down that chute, and all the kids in the neighborhood picked these colored beans out in order to get that, so there wasn't any.
They were sorted by hand then.
Sorted by hand. That's right. 2,000 bushels of them. When I listened to one of the seed men here talking about one of the years, just one of the years that they had when they run 600,000 bushels through a fanning mill.
Mercy.
This is a growth of, and Staley's was a company that I think they were developed about the same time. Now, in Monticello, there was a company that were processing beans and corn in the same manner that Staley's did, and did it for a year and said it was not practical. So they gave it up, and Staley took it over and made a big thing of it.
All right, Mr. McInnes. Around 1934, you met your wife.
Actually met my wife about 1930 at the University of Illinois at a beekeeper's seminar, and she was from Monarga. Her father was a beekeeper, and I was a beekeeper. I went to see her about every 3 weeks because it was 60 miles up there, and I didn't have money to go up every every day or two. And we were married in February.
Oh, that was a short courtship.
February 21st, 1934.
Do you and your wife ever go dancing? And
we didn't learn to dance
Oh.
until sometime after we were married. We went to Decatur High School and learned how to dance.
Uh-huh.
Also, we made several occasions of going to Decatur High School to one kind of a course or another, like bookkeeping or this or that. And my wife went to Millikan University and learned a lot about various kinds of art and making things.
What type of art?
Setting jewelry, and this was one of the things. One of the reasons I think that she wanted to particularly learn this jewelry business was that during the war I had acquired a great number of cameos in Italy, and she did set one or two of these in that class. We were married in 34 and came to White Heath 20-acre farm just west of White Heath, where we did truck gardening and beekeeping. And we're there for 2 years and actually starved out, and then moved to D-Land and lived in D-Land a couple of years. Actually, in D-Land, I started the greenhouse. I built a little greenhouse there. And then in 1938, we moved to Monticello and built a greenhouse on East Washington Street, about 1001. A greenhouse 25 by 50, and later doubled the size. And one of the interesting things coming to Monticello at that time, I couldn't get any credit from anybody. But it was only a short time after we arrived until Mr. McInnes, the manager of the Monticello Lumber Company, come out and asked me if there was anything he could do. I needed a little credit. He would be glad to extend me credit on lumber or whatever.
That was nice.
That was the first that I ever had any occasion. We grossed that first year $1 a day. That wasn't very much. And it wasn't even enough to exist on. And had it not been for my dad being really broad-minded and helping me out a little bit, I would have left Monticello in 10 seconds if I ever had $1 to buy gas to get out of town. But that was one of the problems. I didn't ever have enough money to get out of town. And at the end of a year, Mr. and Mrs. Chitwood, they were due in town, having purchased the Piatt County Journal. And they were having a hard time, too. And they gave us 2 full pages of advertising and rigmarole to tell all about the wonders of the greenhouse. From that time on, it was successful. We had business. And one of the things, I remember one of the first funerals that we had, I think we had maybe 1 piece out of 50 or more that was at the funeral. And by the time we had been in business 3 years, I remember another funeral in which there were 65 pieces there. And we had 64 and somebody else had 1. So we were successful in the business.
You said you
Growing.
made some sort of a draping over the caskets?
Yes, that was the casket pieces and whatever, any kind of offerings of condolence. People sent flowers, roses in those early days were $1 a dozen, and then in 2 or 3 years it went to $2 a dozen. And I can remember as something about the price. Maybe by 1940 or 41, I don't remember exactly in that schedule of time, the wholesalers thought they ought to go up in price. Or maybe this was even after the war, I'm not sure. My memory isn't too perfect. But anyway, we had developed a business selling for Mother's Day 2,000 roses for Mother's Day.
That came out of your greenhouse?
Well, we would buy them and make up these flowers, bouquets or corsages or whatever. But the wholesalers thought they ought to raise the price, and they raised the price so that it had to be, I've forgotten now, $5 or something like that, or maybe 10. I don't remember exactly that, but they killed the business of roses, and we never, in all the 40 years of business, ever came back to selling more than 200 roses for Mother's Day after that. They killed the goose that laid the golden egg.
What flowers did take place of the roses?
Carnations, other things, but never were we able to sell 2,000 roses like we had.
Mm-hmm.
We did, during the course of years, sell a lot of geraniums. In fact, geraniums we sold in all kinds of sizes, but I remember one year we sold I think 8,000 geraniums to one customer. Shipped these out to different customers. And another part of our business of growing things in the greenhouse or in gardens, we grew a lot of small plants, like delphinium plants, and to sell. And we sold at one time, as I recollect, we sold something like 12,000 delphinium plants to a grower down in Florida. And in those days, this was, he says, send these by air. And so we boxed these up, and we had an express office here at that time. Al Parsons run the express place, and we boxed these up. I didn't know very much about how to box them, and when we delivered them, why, Mr. Parsons sort of redid the packaging so that they'd get through. But these packages, I called the man up when they were to be shipped, and as I recollect, the air freight or air express on these was to be $125 on that bunch, and they was just 2 boxes or something like that, 3. And he would have to drive 400 miles to the airport to get them.
There don't seem to be much profit in it.
He still did it. He still did it.
And he made a living?
They grow things down there too.
Yeah.
This was one of the interesting things.
Now, you came to Monticello in 1936. You also remember the original depot.
Yes, they had a freight depot on the
Do you happen to know where it was located?
Wabash, and that was located you entered this depot from Washington Street. It was more or less directly across or catty-cornered from the Pepsin Company, Dr. Caldwell's Pepsin Company. Between the tracks, and as it is now, this would have been just east of Tom Sullivan's Monticello Lumber Company yard and the Heritage Center parking lot. This is where it was. Years later, they tore it down and dismantled it. But this was where the freight depot was. Now, originally, I think when the town was in its early stages, the passenger train ran in this same area. In our early days, we had to order our flowers out of Chicago, and they would come down on the milk train, the Wabash, and we would go up here to the depot and wait for that train. Sometimes it was supposed to come in at 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes it would be 11 or 12 before it get there. And I can remember some of the early times, the city police, sometimes they maybe didn't trust us very well, and they would follow us to see where we were going.
Why?
Well, they just checking up on anybody in town that was out on the street.
Was that curfew?
Well, not necessarily. There was a curfew, yes.
Uh-huh.
But you could be out on the street. But
Yeah.
these guys, they'd follow us to see just where we was going,
Uh-huh.
what we was doing.
Oh.
And we did that for years.
Mr. McInnes, you also, we were talking about it, the Hayworth cabin that was built of solid walnut. Do you happen to remember anything about that?
The Hayworth cabin, of course, was gone when we came to town, but it was located 2 blocks north of here, and the well is still located, is still there, located somewhere across the street from Abbott's car dealership. And there are 2 hackberry trees growing up out of that well. This the cabin, you see, Hayworth came here as an Indian agent to deal with the Indians along about 1822 or thereabouts. And when he got here, he found there was no need to be anybody dealing with the Indians. They were friendly people. And while he was here a couple of years, I may be off on the exact time, because that was before the time I was here. Mr. Pyatt came from Danville with a wagon and tinware, peddling tinware, and he traded Mr. Hayworth this horse, wagon, tinware for his cabin. And Mr. Hayworth took the wagon and tinware and rode merrily on. And Mr. Pyatt stayed, and after a while the county was named for him.
I be darned. I be darned. That is beautiful. Now, how about the Hanselmann? I mean, I'd say it right. Hanselmann
The Hanselmann cabin was still here when we came to town. In fact, as I recollect, there were at least 2 cabins in town that I knew about. One located here, this Hanselmann cabin was right next to the flats, or close by. And it was pretty much rotted down then. It was very low.
Whereabouts?
And this was located at the corner of Market and Washington Street on the northwest corner, or thereabouts, in that area. Later there was a Texaco filling station there at that spot. The flats were not torn down for several years after that. The flats was a two-story, maybe 3-story apartment building, maybe with a tin roof and 2-room apartments or something like that. And it was built mostly with walnut. And for some reason or other, it was outlawed. I forgot now the proper word for getting rid of them. But anyway, Floyd Bowman, I believe, had purchased it and remodeled it. And I don't know, I think maybe it finally sold to McInnes. And there really wasn't anything really wrong with that, except the looks of the outside, because it was an absolutely sound building. Maybe needed a fire escape on the back to allow people to get out easily, but a covering of some sort on the outside with a little nicer roof, and it would be acceptable even today. But it didn't look very good, and it was rented for maybe as much as, or as little as $30 a month. At the less privileged people were the ones that lived there.
Was there ever such a thing in Monticello like a poorhouse?
The poorhouse, yes. The poor farm, not poor house.
Okay.
But poor farm was operated by the Piatt County supervisors, Piatt County government. They had something like a 400-acre farm west of Monticello, and the house was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 stories, a brick structure, maybe with a basement too. and people that didn't have a place to go went there and lived and worked, did the best they could, and this served a real good purpose because they produced their living right there.
They were not looked down upon because they
Not
lived in...
really. Not really.
All right, yeah.
Just because you lived out there didn't necessarily. Because they didn't have any.
Well, you said they made a living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They made their own living really, right there. Even though the county, it was a taxing proposition, but as I looked at it, they worked. Anybody that was able worked on that farm or round about the farm, and they raised chickens and cattle and hogs, and they did their own right there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had quite a garden, so there wouldn't really be such a burden to the public like there is today. Nothing like it. And
When you came here
to
in
me, I think it was a bad mistake when they
yeah.
changed their ideas. Many things that I think are bad mistakes, well, they went through anyway.
When you first came here to Monticello with your wife, Wilma, what was different about the downtown as you see it today? The square, around the courthouse?
Well, of course, when we first came here, the Hanselman cabin was still there, the flats was there, Standard Oil Station was, I believe, was there, but it was a very small station, very small, and there were perhaps there was maybe as many as 7 or 8 or maybe a dozen filling stations. There were a dozen saloons or taverns in town.
Mm-hmm. That didn't affect the
nobody made a living at it.
They didn't. Oh, wasn't that during the Prohibition or whatever? When was the...
This was after the Prohibition days.
Uh-huh.
Everybody had a tavern. They didn't call it saloons anymore.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I think Monticello's laws prohibit you calling such a thing a saloon.
Oh, okay. Now,
but
did they have a butcher shop or...
Yes, there was butcher shops, there was bakeries, there was dime stores, there were, I think, 12 groceries in town, or thereabouts, and
little owned, grocery store owned, like family owned, you mean?
well, as I recollect, back in those days, there was A.R. West had a store up about where Illinois Power is, and then there was a Kroger store, there was a Piggly Wiggly store, and there was at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 community groceries out in somebody's home. In fact, as I recollect, the person that has Red Fox today. His start, maybe the one he bought it from was Gene Gray, and that was out in a residential community. And as I recollect, it was just started as a one room deal, and finally expanded a little and a little more, and finally got into a bigger deal.
Now, the Allerton Library, was it ever anything besides a library? What was it before it was a library?
The library, as I recollect, maybe at first, when I first come to town, the library was located where the Eisner store is, 1 block south of the courthouse, on that corner, across from the Presbyterian Church. And
what function did the library have?
It was sort of a community meeting place, maybe. Then I think this Allerton business come into being. I'm not sure about that, but then the library, as I recollect, went into down here into the building where it is today, only in the south end where the garden room is. That's where the library was. And the north end, where the library is, was the opera house. And the upper deck, where the ballroom is, that, of course, was just vacant. It was seating capacity here to see the theater. And that theater, that Allerton building, was built by Mr. Allerton because he liked to have opera. And in order to have opera, he had to pay the bill. And so he built the building. He paid the people, the players, to come here and put on the plays. And of course he invited certain ones to be part of the 400 Club. That was part of it, I guess. And also he had these players out there at his mansion. That's where he took care of them. They lived out there during the time.